Good morning and welcome to the Wednesday, June 24th, 2009 edition of the Investigative Journal. I'm your host, Greg Szymanski. You're listening to LibertyRadioLive.com, and my guest today is Noreen Gosch. And Noreen, it's been way too long since Noreen Gosch has been on my program, so we're going to start from the beginning and tell the whole story about what happened to her son, Johnny Gosch. Earlier last week, and at the bottom of the hour, Jim Rothstein, a New York police detective, will join us to add some things to this story. He's been working with Noreen after he left the New York Police Department to try and locate Johnny and to uncover really what happened to him when on September 5th, 1982, Johnny was delivering his papers for the Des Moines Register, and that began a 23-year search after he was kidnapped. And Noreen is one of the only mothers in this country that has stood up to the federal authorities, has stood up to the lies she's been told to get to the truth. Many people break down, can't handle it, because this is a story that is not just an isolated incident of one boy, a young boy, being taken off his paper route and put into a child abduction ring, a child pornography ring. It is a really serious problem in this country that gets repeated over and over and over again. Noreen is with us today to explain that, and we're going to start from the beginning. I just want to make sure Noreen's with us. How are you, Noreen?
I'm good. Thank you for having me on the program this morning.
Okay, let's get to the reason I want to start all over again is it's been way too long since you've been on the show with me, and I want to let our listeners, I want to refresh their memories. Plus, I want to tell this story from the beginning because, as I said, this story is probably being repeated somewhere in this country right as we speak. We need to understand how these child pedophile rings operate, who's behind them, and no one better to tell us the story than you. Tell us how this began on September 5th, 1982.
Okay. On September 5th, my son Johnny got up and went out of the house to do his paper route. And it was a normal Sunday. He would pull his wagon up to the corner, which was about a block away, load his papers, and then start folding them. And the paper drop was where a number of other paper boys also gathered in the morning. That morning, Johnny headed up to the paper drop. He had our little dog with him, and he got part way there, and a man pulled up alongside the curb and stopped and asked for direction. Johnny did not stop and talk to the man. He continued on to the appropriate corner, and this information was all supplied to us by witnesses.
Okay.
Johnny got to the corner, and by the time he got there, the man had made a U-turn in the middle of the street, went back up, and then pulled his car in where all the boys were folding their papers. He shut off his engine, he opened his passenger door, and swung his feet out onto the curb. Another man pulled up with his car, and he was a 44-year-old attorney in Des Moines who was picking up his son's papers. That man is now a judge here. He threw his son's papers in the car, noticed this other man sitting there, and then drove away. The man who had pulled up asking for directions began to ask the boys all for directions again. And by this time, there were 3 boys at the corner gathering up their bundles to deliver. Johnny said to one of the other boys, "There's something weird about this guy. I'm scared. I'm going home right now." And Johnny pulled his wagon and took off down the street towards home.
Okay. And how far was that from your home? That drop-off point, how far was it from your house?
Only a block.
Okay.
Yeah, just one block.
Go ahead.
Johnny got partway down the street, and the man in the car suddenly pulled his feet in, closed the passenger door, started the engine, but before he took off, he reached up and he flicked the dome light on and off 3 times. and then pulled away. At the point that he flicked the dome light, another man came out from between two houses and a group of trees and kind of fell in behind Johnny, a few feet behind him, and followed him down the street and around the corner. At that point, I doubt very much whether Johnny even realized he was being followed.
Okay.
Because the man was just so silent. The other paperboy noticed how tall this man was and didn't think anything of it because nobody knew a crime was in progress. Johnny went around the corner and out of sight. Moments later, another boy who was in his house, in his bedroom, heard a noise outside, and he looked out, and he saw Johnny being shot with some type of stun gun or something that caused him to drop to the ground. At that point, the man who had been on foot following him and someone who was in the back seat of the car who jumped out, one grabbed his feet, one grabbed his shoulders and arms. They tossed him in the car, and then they jumped in, and the car sped away, running the stop sign, heading north towards the interstate. They went a few blocks, and they pulled into another street where there was a van. The van was parked with the motor running. They pulled up, they transferred Johnny's body to the van, and then both vehicles split up and went different directions out of town. Okay. This has taken us years to put all these pieces together. We brought in private detectives who canvassed the area and questioned everybody in a several-mile radius of our home. And so we had pieces of all of this from years ago, and then our big break came when someone did confess to his part in the kidnapping, and he knew certain details that we had never made public, which we had learned through all of our interviews.
And was that Paul Bonacci?
Yes, it was Paul Bonacci, and it was 9 years after the kidnapping. Yeah,
I'm going to get into his testimony in a moment, but let's go back to that first day. Okay. Because while Johnny now was being kidnapped, of course, you were at home. You weren't aware of it yet. How long was it after Johnny was missing that you were made aware of his disappearance?
Johnny left the house at 10 minutes to 6, and we were notified about a little after 6:30 because neighbors had not received their papers. So the kidnappers had about a half an hour lead time.
All right. Now, here's one of the interesting points, and I want to start with this because there was information even that first day from eyewitnesses that Johnny had been kidnapped, but yet the police, the local police, decided not to do anything and to claim that he was a runaway. Now, explain the evidence that you had that first day, which should have alerted the police to basically call this a kidnapping and start searching with the information that you had and others of his abductors. Go ahead.
That's exactly right. When I called the police department, after we were notified that neighbors didn't get their papers, Johnny's father ran out to help him, thinking he was just running late. He came back to the house and said, "Johnny's gone. His wagon is sitting up at the corner loaded with papers." He didn't even get the bundle cut. And I called the police right away, and it took them 45 minutes to get to our house. During that 45 minutes, I made phone calls to the district manager of the Des Moines Register, found out the names of all the boys that picked up their papers that morning, including the attorney. I called all their homes, and I had all the information about the type of car, the color of the car, what the man looked like, what he was wearing. I had everything written down by the time the police arrived. I told the cop all of this information, gave him what the witnesses had told me, and the cop stood in my kitchen, looked at me, and said, "Yeah, well, has your son ever run away before?"